Welcome everyone. So we're getting started just a couple of moments late here. Technical difficulties as always.
All right. Welcome.
You might hear a few sounds in the background. They're actually doing some construction on our building. And so they had some unscheduled activities that they planned that are having some background noise, but looks like we're still going to be able to move forward. So again, my name is Chase Harvey. I work for the Office for International Education at Georgia Tech. My official title is International Student and Scholar Advisor. And we're here today to kind of shed some light on the Mentor Jackets program hosted by Georgia Tech through the Georgia Tech Alumni Association and the Student Alumni Association. And so in specific, what we're hoping to talk about and why I'm here is to discuss the types of strategies and things that we can do to best guide and mentor international students. International students being a group who I think really enjoy the mentor program, and with there being quite a large population at Georgia Tech, certainly take advantage of a number of the resources that are available, the mentoring program being one of them. And so today, what I'm hoping to do is kind of a train the mentor style session where we can establish some common ideas around what a mentor is and why a mentor gets involved in this type of relationship with a student, what types of things you could expect out of that friendship, how you would expect it to grow, and in specific, how do we work with international students. What types of things you could expect. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move over to our next slide here. Again, here's our introduction, our outline, so to speak. Okay. So we've got defining the term mentor, doing a type of mentoring skills inventory, what makes a mentoring relationship successful, what is this particular program, Mentor Jackets, trying to accomplish, where do international students fit in, myths about international students, common issues facing international students, what a mentor can do to help an international mentee, and the wonderful rewards that can come out of this type of relationship. Common issues facing international students. Let's move forward to my story. Again, my name is Chase Harvey, and my official title here at Georgia Tech is International Student and Scholar Advisor, and I've been here since October 2015. And in my current position, about 70% of my job duties revolve around actual immigration regulations. We have two distinct populations of students at our campus that fall under the international realm, and they're under the F and J student visa types. The J program having actually a number of different categories you could be under, but one of them being a student, and the other one, the F program specifically, really being the traditional type of student visa that many of you might think about when you think of students coming to enter the United States for study. I got into international education quite a while ago, and I'm still sometimes think back on some of those experiences and what kind of got me into this specific profession. And a lot of that really came out of my undergraduate education. So I actually, when I first attended, I went to the school, University at Buffalo in New York. That's actually where I grew up in a really rural community in western New York. I went to the University at Buffalo, and that was quite an eye-opening experience for me. They have quite a diverse campus. Actually, at campus, I think it's just a little bit larger than Tech, maybe a couple more thousand students.
I went to the University of Buffalo.
And one of the things that I found that was really great about that campus is there were so many different types of people doing so many different types of things. And so there was a lot of things to experience as a student and trying to fit in to my busy schedule as an undergraduate. I found myself interested in some of the math and sciences coming out of high school, but the more I interacted with different populations at the University of Buffalo, I found that I really enjoyed learning about people's history and their culture and the languages that they speak. And as a result, I got involved in a few different international student organizations, as well as ended up taking some history classes and changing my major to history, actually. And in the course of doing so, I happened upon a class that was modern Korean history. And that class was the type of experience that just kind of clicked with me. I spent a lot of time talking to the professor after the classes or during office hours and trying to learn more about that culture and their history. And for some reason, I found it really fascinating. And that, luckily for me, coincided with some different on-campus employment positions, such as the traditional type of resident advisor, or in my case, academic assistant, where I did some tutoring in the residence halls. And I found that I ended up having a mentor kind of in this faculty member that taught this class, who was exposing me to this new culture and so many things to learn about this other type of the world that I'd never heard about before, or I guess I'd never really researched in depth before, in combination with working with students, sometimes from the same country, from Korea, who were just regular students here, and they were on visas. And so I learned from them about the types of things that they were facing as international students. And then I also was getting interested in how a university serves these types of students and what they do to make sure they're having a good experience. And that tied in really closely with the things that I was studying. So that got me really interested in this field called student affairs or international education. And so student affairs is pretty broad, and that tied in really. It's for essentially all the different types of student services that you traditionally think of on a campus, whether it be housing or career services or Greek life, these types of units. And then we connect that in in particular, in this case, Office for International Student Career Services. Okay, and so the thing to think about here for me is I went to visit a career counselor, and she asked, what my plans were for the future, and I wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to do, and I explained my interests both in history and in education, and she kind of suggested that I explore this route of international education and become a professional in this field. And so that's how I got tied in. I ended up applying to a number of different graduate schools, and luckily I actually got into the University of Georgia, and I know that there's a little bit of a rivalry between Tech and UGA. I will say that I do enjoy Tech a little bit better than I did my time at UGA, but I did learn a lot of really wonderful things while I was there, and had some great experiences working in their Office for International Student Life. This was an office in which I ran a number of different programs marketed to help integrate international students into the larger student body to promote learning across cultures, these types of things. And so I got a lot of really good experiences out of that. After I graduated, I went abroad, and then I lived in actually South Korea for a year, and I taught English. And I came back to try and pick up where I left off in terms of my education. I received my master's degree and moved forward with trying to work at a university. So I worked at a couple of schools, and then I got to Georgia Tech in October 2015. And in that role, I learned a lot about immigration, some things things that I'd never learned before. In addition to my duties, which is the other 30% of my job, which is planning, advising student organizations, helping them determine what types of things you can do on campus as a student group, doing a lot of different events to again help with cross-cultural understanding and promoting the idea that this is quite a large community here and we have people from different places. How do we start conversations and how do we learn from each other? And that's grown into some state and regional level responsibilities. And so I think I'll move on from there, but my point here is that getting involved in international education or learning about other people can be quite a long process, and it's something that is you have to approach with kind of a learning-oriented mindset. And I think when we're talking about a mentoring program, and in specific in working with international students, you have to think about that these types of things, you're not going to run into things that you're used to or that you always have an answer to. And so sometimes you have to think critically about how do you help someone move through a challenging situation, regardless really of where they're from, despite the fact that that might add an additional layer. So let's go ahead and dive into talking a little bit about what it is to be a mentor. Of course, the traditional PowerPoint presentation here, we've got the definition of what a mentor is from the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary. Essentially, they provide two types of definitions. One, a trusted counselor or guide, and number two, a tutor or a coach. I think really that's probably what everyone expects. That's a pretty standard definition. But more importantly, the term mentor has a different meaning in practice to each person. I think that in thinking about what type of mentor you want to be, you probably want to ask yourself some questions. And I've got a list here. I'm not going to pull them up on the PowerPoint, but I'll just read them to you. For example, you might think about before you start a mentoring relationship, thinking about yourself as, what's your current most important role in your life? How do you see yourself? For example, you might think about before you start. What are the things that have been most impactful experiences for you? What's your current most important role in your life? It's like our monitor might have cut out for a short moment. There we go. Thank you. Separately, you might also want to think about what are the types of things that you do when you're at work. What are the things that you excel at there? What are your areas of expertise? How do you spend your free time? Separately, what's one thing that is important for other people to know about you? What do you choose to share with other people? What are the possible strengths that you could bring to a mentoring relationship? And what are your possible maybe like weaknesses or worries about how you could function as a mentor? One thing that I really like to stress is the idea of thinking again about that learning-oriented mindset. What could you possibly hope to gain from being a mentor? Or what do you want to learn from this experience? And in connection with that, what is the most important thing that I hope my mentee will gain from this experience? So I know I ran through those questions pretty quickly, but the point is that a mentoring type of role is a very reflective role. And so trying to think about who you are and what you might bring to this relationship with a person that you've probably never interacted with before is really important because it's going to set some of the tone for how you interact with your mentee. So the last piece here, let's think for a moment about mentors you might have had in the past. For most people, mentors are probably going to be people that they've worked for, like direct supervisors, or people that they've studied under, whether it be as like a student or like some sort of professional education. Someone that you've learned some skills from, a faculty member, an instructor. Or even you might think of your family type relationships. You might think of your father or your mother as a mentor, or a grandparent, an uncle, etc., or an aunt. And these type of people, if you care about them a lot, if you define them as someone who's had a mentoring impact on you, what are the things that they did really well? What qualities did they have? What types of ideas or values did they impart upon you? These types of things are going to be important to think about in comparison with yourself and what you might be able to bring to that type of relationship. So I'm just going to pause for about 30 seconds, and if you're sitting there with your sticky note or a piece of paper, maybe write down 3 or 4 things that you think that these mentors might have had, their values or qualities, and then we'll go ahead and move forward to the next slide in a moment. All right, that's probably long enough for most people. I teased it just a little bit because I skipped ahead of myself, but this list here is probably something along the lines of what you might have put together had you been given 15 or 20 minutes, or if we're sitting together as a group and working on this together. So often at the top of this list is that a mentor is nice. They're the type of person that you want to be around. Responsive, communicative, supportive, helpful, engaged, caring, welcoming, friendly, understanding. These are all qualities that essentially make someone easy to interact with, someone that you can trustworthy, could easily go up there. These type of values are the types of things that you think about in someone who's probably open-minded and is willing to share about themselves and also learn from another person, which is really what this mentor-mentee relationship is all about. Those last 3 on there, challenging, encouraging, and wise, are ones that I see often as well. And I do want to focus on that word challenging. I don't mean that they're difficult to work with, but I mean that they are someone who is willing to challenge a mentee to try new things, to think about things in different ways, and to explore themselves and explore the relationship that you're going to develop with this person. I think that that's one of the greatest qualities that you can have in a mentor, is that the person who's giving you this advice is not only willing to understand your comments or your thoughts as they are, but kind of able to think at that next level, think outside the box a little bit, and give you some advice that helps you move forward in your thinking or think more critically about whatever topic you might be discussing at that current moment. So again, here's a list that I put together on my own, but this certainly isn't comprehensive. I think, again, if y'all were to do this in a group, you would see people probably repeat some of these items on their own lists multiple times, and we would have maybe some check marks up to supportive or helpful, caring, etc. And maybe some of the other more unique ones like challenging or encouraging sometimes might be up there once or twice. So what makes a mentoring relationship successful? Maybe you're all these previous things. You have all these values and qualities, but that doesn't necessarily mean inherently you're going to be a good mentor. It just means you have all of these qualities. You also have to think about what essentially makes a good mentoring relationship. What can a person as a mentor or a mentee get out of this type of relationship? And so I've got a few up here. I think number 1, a collaborative approach to the relationship. I think it's easy for a mentor or a mentee to think that one or the other person defines the relationship, and that they end up kind of driving the interactions that you have. Especially for a student, you could imagine it's kind of intimidating. Not even if you're international, but an American student who's coming to Atlanta. It's a large city, and maybe meeting someone in the area, or maybe you have some sort of relationship in another city, and you Skype, for example. The idea that one person is solely responsible for driving that relationship is a pretty big mistake. It's important to be open and to develop goals together for the relationship. And I know that's something that's very briefly part of your mentor application, but I want to highlight it here. Again, a collaborative approach, but being open to new goals and ideas for the relationship as well. So at the beginning, you might set up some ideas for what this might look like and how often you might meet and what type of things you might want to work on. But over the course of that relationship, you might find that things change and that there's different needs. We're in a very common time right now where that might occur. So it's November. It's very busy, and you would definitely find that students who might want to work on a mentor or mentee goal are often instead studying for their exams, and they simply might not have time at the moment. So being open to new ideas and to being flexible in how you might accomplish some of those goals. Active listening, you'll find that sometimes listening to someone else's problems or someone else's challenges can be difficult not to insert your own comments or to override them with your own experiences and think that it's going to be the same, and that whatever your answer was for that problem, or that's the solution for that problem, should be their solution. Of course, that will likely be helpful in 8-9 times out of 10, but that doesn't mean that should be the only thing that you're doing. You really need to listen to the other person and try to understand their thoughts and their feelings in order to really be able to help them in this kind of traditional mentor type way. Consistency and dependability, I think that's pretty easy to understand but difficult to practice. Study and research shows that mentors who are consistent and predictable in good ways, showing up on time and being communicative, for example, responding within a certain period of time, those relationships tend to be a lot more successful than those who do not. And that goes for both the mentor and the mentee. Again, I talked about this a little bit, knowing that at times relationships can feel one-sided. When one person's busy and the other person is not, it can feel like you might be driving the relationship more than the other person. But finding a way to work with that person to make time is important, and then not being discouraged by the fact that you might not receive a response immediately, for example. Two-party responsibility on how to spend time together. You both can decide on what you want to do and what's important for you that day or in that meeting, and that one person shouldn't necessarily be generating an agenda to go over. You will find that as you move through, one person might dominate, and that's pretty natural. But it isn't necessarily the most healthy version of a mentor-mentee relationship. And I think it's important to realize that not everything's about accomplishing those goals, but being able to focus on who the person is and not necessarily the formal relationship you have with that person. At the beginning, it can be more formal, but hopefully finding a way to make things a little bit more informal will definitely add to the value. And finally, utilize the program coordinator and institute resources to help your relationship excel. So the Alumni Association, the Student Alumni Association, they all have some wonderful tools. And the program coordinator in particular, I'm sure, would be more than happy to respond to emails or provide some advice on how to work with your mentee, since that's their area of expertise. And of course, you could reach out to me as well if you had some general questions, but in particular about international students. So in your application, I took a quick look at basically what the Mentor Jackets program requires of you all. And so I see that there is some online web forums. It seems pretty easy to get into the Mentor Jacket program. That doesn't mean being a mentor is easy or sustaining that relationship is. But it seems that we have a lot of really great alumni and that many of them are more than willing to participate. And so I'm glad that there's a pretty easy way for them to join up and to kind of give back and work with current students. But one of the things in the application, or a few of the things in the application that I thought were valid, method and how often you communicate with the mentor or the mentee. We've discussed how that's important, the goals of the relationship, and strategies for achieving these goals. Now, I did have a chat with the program coordinator, and it looks like maybe filling out this web form isn't necessarily required, but highly encouraged. I think in doing this, you're really setting the most basic layer for what type of relationship you want to have with this person and what types of things you want to accomplish. You don't necessarily have to have a full bulleted list of all the important points, but getting you thinking about that and practicing that will certainly make the time that you spend together a lot more valuable, and you'll find that you achieve your goals a little bit easier. I do think that some of the larger goals of the Mentor Jackets program, as I understand it, will revolve around building community, sharing experiences with one another, having that common tech experience, and in some ways living vicariously, I think, is one of the great experiences that you can have as a mentor. Finding an idea or finding an opportunity to have lifelong learning. There's so much that you can learn from people who are younger than you, people who are older than you, people who have grown up in different generations with different perspectives, and being able to embrace that and learn how another person thinks and what type of skills and ideas they bring to the table is really incredible, and I think that's a good opportunity for mentors. Networking, of course, is always relevant in this day and age in our economy, and so that's a big bonus. Remember, these students are often going to be highly skilled or are in the hopes of becoming highly skilled by the time they reach graduation. So who knows, if they might be able to help you with a project, or if they might have some things to learn from you, and that can be a really wonderful experience. But most of all, of course, fun. I think you all probably joined up in the program because this can be a really enjoyable experience. And so finding time to make sure that you have that, if you go see a movie with them, or you discuss something, a TV show, for example, or you go to a game together, these are things that bring people back to these types of programs. So where do international students fit in? And I've talked for a while about what it is to be a mentor and how to have this relationship. But where do international students fit in with the U.S. Educational system, and specifically at Georgia Tech? I've got some bullets here. International enrollment in American colleges and universities has grown exponentially. There are so many international students in the United States now. And the number of them here, or who have recently graduated, is a drop in the bucket compared to the total number that would be willing to come if they had the opportunity. I don't need to necessarily go into all the politics around how people get here, what they need to provide, etc. But it's pretty straightforward in terms of they receive admission from the university, they work to make sure that they have the ability to pay, and that they have the academic know-how and the drive in order to be successful here. And oftentimes at large universities, there will be kind of a percentage of international students relative to the larger domestic student body there at the university. You'll often see this anywhere from 1 to maybe 10%, depending on the size of the university. And the good news is that these people are certainly coming in and adding to the U.S. economy. They're oftentimes adding to the university experience. I can't think of how many times I've had an interaction with an American student who was interested in going to France or maybe interested in going to Japan and as a study abroad experience, but wasn't sure how well they might like it. And so I connected them with an international student that I knew from that country, and those two developed a friendship that ended up being long-lasting. So there's a lot that international students add outside of just the economy. They add a lot to the educational experience here for American students, in addition to getting their own education. And I think that's one of the great bonuses of being a mentor is you not only get to work with a student, but you get to work with someone from a completely different country, which is really fun, even if it has its own challenges. The U.S. has a long tradition in reputable education, and our educational systems have grown in size as well as the available opportunities that we have. And so this is very attractive for people from other countries, in particular because the U.S. economy and job market attracts highly skilled people, or soon to be highly skilled people, from all over the world, and people want to take part. Of course, going to college, as many of you know, will develop a lot of those networks that are necessary to be successful in the job market post-graduation. Changes in the global education market have also, in some cases, made getting into U.S. universities comparatively easier than accessing those in students' own countries. So India is a perfect example. There are many, many, many very intelligent students coming out of the middle and high school systems in India, but they simply don't have enough seats in their universities in order to guarantee an education for every student who's qualified. And so you'll find that students from many countries will end up applying to U.S. universities, not only because they're talented enough to do so, but because the market's so competitive in their home country that it might be easier for them to get in here. I don't want to confuse that with thinking that it is easy to come to the United States or that it is easy to gain entrance to an American university, but comparatively to their own home country, that might be the case. And it's important to keep in mind that the majority of these students grow up with their own myths and beliefs about what university life might be like. And I think that's one of the things that's so fun to explore is what movies they've seen or what TV shows they've watched or what rumors or myths they've heard from relatives that might have attended school in the United States, and them anticipating their own experience. It's extremely similar to what a high school student might be experiencing here in the U.S. as an American, but with this whole added layer of context, because it's a whole different world to them. In particular, many of these students do end up being interested in the same things that a mentor is, or the same things that an American student are. That's building communities and support networks, sharing their experiences, opportunities for lifelong learning, networking, and fun. And I think these all are virtually the same as what I believe the Mentor Jackets program is trying to accomplish. That last caveat there is, of course, students are interested in finding employment. It's not easy to take on a big load of debt or to owe money to your family to pay for your education and not have the anticipation that you're going to find a job somewhere. So of course you're going to interact with mentees that are probably looking for employment and will probably ask you where they could go to try and find more information, what connections you might have, etc. Again, a lot of times it's not only a pressure for themselves, but culturally maybe to help their own family prosper and their own family to grow, because who knows what type of background this person might have, whether or not they come from a high-income family or a low-income family, and what type of opportunities they might have had. So that has its own set of pressures. But that's not the only reason why a student might be interested in a mentor relationship, mentor-mentee relationship. So to address some of these myths while we're on this topic, I hear all the time that people believe that all international students are inherently very wealthy. Otherwise, how could they possibly pay for education in the United States? This is certainly not the case. Just like American students, there are some international students who come here and do have their own large amount of wealth, either from themselves or from their family. But that doesn't mean every student is. And in fact, with the growing population, this is becoming more and more rare. What is more common is students borrowing money from loan institutions, either within the United States or in their home countries, in order to pay for their education, similar to the way most students do here in the United States. They might also be on scholarships for excellent academic performance from their home countries, whether it's from a private organization or from their state government, and might be here to complete some specific objectives in order to return their home country and give back to whoever was sponsoring their education. But like I said, oftentimes students coming here might come from middle or low income backgrounds and not necessarily have all the opportunities that the myths might insist that they have. Also, very common is the idea that these students aren't able to speak English. There's quite a wide variety in terms of English ability, but everyone, in order to attend the United States, will have to meet a certain minimum language requirement. If you're talking about a regular degree seeking F or J visa holder who's coming here to get a degree. Now, some might be from countries where English is a second language. They might be from countries where English is their first language, and the idea that they wouldn't speak English as good as anybody else in the United States is kind of preposterous for them. And so just because English is their first or second language doesn't necessarily mean that they can't speak it just as well as someone else. But you will find that there will be a variety, but most should be able to meet a certain minimum set of expectations in terms of communication. I often hear some people complain that students might not have good hygiene if they're from another country. Again, I think this is cultural. Americans have a very set standard for beauty. We have a very set standard for or stereotype for what clean is, how often you should shower, the use of deodorant, like these types of things. And some of these concepts are foreign to people from other countries. Not necessarily because the concept of being clean on its own is foreign, but the idea of maintaining an American cultural viewpoint on it is what we should expect for someone who shows up for work or shows up to your meeting. So try not necessarily to judge immediately if you notice that something's different from what you would expect, but that could be a conversation you could approach in helping that person understand the American culture and what people might expect were they to go to a job interview or in your future mentor or mentee meetings. And this is something you can talk about. I also hear, of course, that students are only here to take American jobs. This is not as often as you might think, but every once in a while I hear that. Or that they're only interested in becoming a mentee for the purpose of gaining a mentor who can help them obtain a job. Of course, I talked earlier about all the important things in terms of building community and support networks and sharing experiences, and those are all really positive things that aren't necessarily associated with employment. And there are plenty of laws in place that are designed in a way to make sure that students coming here aren't necessarily coming and taking large portions of the job opportunities available to any student by virtue of them being an international student. I think, again, the primary purpose of them being here is for study, and employment might come secondary to that, and will certainly be a conversation that comes up, but isn't the primary objective for them to be here, and not necessarily the primary objective of them having this relationship with you. I think the communication item is something that's related to English as a second language and sometimes as a first language, but really we're talking about things that every student faces where they're not able to necessarily reply to an email within 24 hours or might not call you back immediately. And some of that, again, has cultural expectations for it. What is common in the United States? What would we expect? 24 hours for an email, for example. But in another country, that might not be the case. So being patient and talking about what you might expect is an effective way to make sure that you don't you don't get upset or damage your relationship by failing to adhere to one person or another's expectations without communicating those. I also hear that every international student is either from China or India. Those are definitely the two largest populations that are in the United States, and certainly are large populations at Tech. But there are many, many students from other places in the world who are here, and so your mentee isn't necessarily going to be a Chinese or an Indian student. But even if they were, there's so much you have to gain from them. And needy is another thing, and rude is another thing that I think tie so closely to our cultural expectations. Of course, if you were to imagine yourself visiting another country and you have a point of contact, someone who is going to, in your opinion, be someone who can help guide you, you would probably rely on that person pretty heavily, especially if you're going to a country that isn't necessarily one that speaks the same language or is similar to your own country of origin. And so it takes some time to establish some boundaries in terms of what someone being needy is and what they aren't, and what that means, and how you can make sure that you're able to develop a good relationship, but not one that's solely one person being dependent on the other. That's definitely not the case. And again, there are many international students that are extremely high achieving and might benefit from a mentor, but don't need one to function perfectly well on their own. And being rude, again, rude is completely dependent on what culture you grew up in and what your expectations for interacting with someone might be. A perfect example is the idea of cutting line. In the United States, unless you're a high school student cutting in line for lunch, this isn't something that's generally seen as acceptable, right? And even then, it might happen, but only because it's hard to speak up for yourself as a high school student. The idea that you might cut a line or get to the front and try to get service immediately, even if you haven't been there for as long as someone else, is a pretty common practice in other countries. And so setting up expectations and discussing what those might mean and how that's unique to American culture or the culture of an international student is really interesting, and that can be part of the fun of talking with someone from another place. Again, these are all stereotypes or myths. These people are individuals with their own thoughts, feelings, and dreams, and cultural differences play a role in how we think. But the vast majority of people you're going to interact with who are studying here are probably going to be extremely pleasant, if only you have the time to really get to know them and develop the relationship. And fortunately, you might have the chance to do that with several people through this program. What I will mention here is that there are some common issues that do face international students. And just going right down the line here, cross-cultural adjustment is a major one. Learning what's appropriate in American culture and what isn't, and how do they deal with the fact that that's maybe the same or very different from their home country. It's not easy to get through, and there's a term called a culture shock, where a student might first arrive in the United States and think everything's great, but as the number of challenges that they face increases, that kind of honeymoon effect wears off, and it can become very difficult for someone to function normally in terms of making it to class every day and getting their homework assignments done on time and following through on their commitments. And eventually, especially with the help of a mentor, this person might be able to grow and come to a more steady place. But adjusting to a new culture isn't easy, and for many of you who might have been to another country, you can definitely understand that. Adjusting to the American education system, this part certainly is something that is important. The idea that we have so much homework here in the United States. There's so many tasks to do for a given class in comparison to some countries, especially in Europe, where there might be a midterm and a final exam, and that's it. That might be the 50% of your grade is the midterm and 50% is your final, and there's no work to do in between besides attend class. You can imagine where someone with that expectation who comes to the United States and then has 4 or 5 hours of homework every night might struggle to work through that. There's also, of course, ideas around intellectual property, copyright, these types of things that are difficult as well, because not everyone grows up in an American institution where getting used to using a works cited or a bibliography is common use. This isn't necessarily the same in other places, and so learning to do that and to cite properly is difficult. English language proficiency. Of course, you could speak conversational English very well, but if you go into an advanced biology classroom, there's going to be a lot of terms that are going to be very difficult to understand, whereas an American or a native English speaker might have more context than an international student to help them understand what a certain term might mean, especially with Latin roots, for example. Interpersonal relationships and social support networks. The potential for isolation is very real for international students. I think when things become overwhelming, most people tend to kind of shut down, stop participating in a lot of the things that they might otherwise enjoy, because it's so hard to stay on top of all the things that need to be done. However, the more friendships you can make and the more people you can interact with and learn from will often result directly in a better integration into the university and hopefully a better relationship. So hopefully you can do that as a mentor or as introduce someone into these things. Physical and psychological well-being, of course, the ideas around maintaining your health and finding time to exercise. We all face that challenge. But also, number two, making sure that you're taking the time to process, to get enough sleep, and if needed, to find counseling help where possible to help you get through the many different challenges that we face and the different roles that we have as we progress through life. Managing finances is certainly quite explanatory. Again, not every student comes here with a large sum of funds that they can use to buy any given thing that's on their mind. Many are coming here with as many concerns or more, given that they'll often have out-of-state tuition charges, which are significantly more than a student who, for example, attends or is a resident of the state in which they attend university. So managing finances can be difficult. And finally, knowing their immigration regulations. This piece here is, I would highly encourage that you take the time to talk to them about what do they think they have limitations on in terms of work, or what they think they have limitations on as an international student, and what they can do and they can't do, and helping them understand that it's important that they do follow the law and work with their own offices for international education and their own offices around the university to make sure that they're following both the student code of conduct, but also all the different laws associated with their visa type. And you can always encourage them to reach out to International Student Advisor here at OIE, or the Office for International Education at Georgia Tech, to make sure that you understand, or to make sure that they understand properly what they can and can't do while they're here in the U.S. So what can you do to help address these things? Numbers 1 through 7 correspond directly with the items on the previous slide here. So I'm going to go here. Number 1, that's cross-cultural adjustment. Introduce them to American culture and to Southern culture. Find a way to take them out to dinner or to bring them to your home and talk about the things that are important to you or important to people that live in this area. That can help in setting expectations and then helping them understand the context for why things sometimes happen around them that they might not understand. Number 2, explain and help troubleshoot the stereotypical American university experience. So again, talking about what times are stressful as a student at Tech, what times are easy, when should you be taking advantage of certain resources, what resources are available as students of the university, the exercise, campus recreation center, for example, the counseling center, student life as a whole, the dean of students, our offices, or the Student Alumni Association. Get them involved in these groups, and that'll help them navigate the university experience and learn from the people around them. As far as English language experience, the number 1 need is in terms of small talk, talking about sports or talking about movies. These types of things that we all take for granted are really easy to discuss with other people from the same culture. but not necessarily from someone who has no context for a certain sport that is popular here but might not be in their home country. Introduce as many idioms as you can. Things like talking about getting cold feet before a marriage. Contextually, the idea of getting cold feet, of course, an American person would know that, since that's a very common idiom. But all most international students are going to hear and think is that there's something wrong maybe with your circulation, and they won't understand why that's important in the context of maybe getting married, and that very common kind of idea. And so using these idioms can be helpful in preparing them for a workplace or preparing them to interact with the university in a way that allows them to adjust quite easily to different types of speech. Introduce them to your personal and professional network and find ways to learn about theirs. Of course, they're going to want to be able to meet you and meet other people that you know, but also find ways to get to know who they know and what types of things that they bring to the table. Sharing is definitely a big part of this relationship, so you should find ways to do it. Explain how you navigate your own work-life balance. This is a commentary on their psychological and physical well-being. Explain what you would do if you could have as much time as you needed in the day to get in all your exercise or to get in all your processing in terms of thinking about today's events. In terms of financial help, of course, no expectation that you help them with finances, but your ideas in terms of how you can be frugal are certainly useful. Costco is certainly something that I recommend to students, and that many Americans are aware of. Sam's Club, these types of things. If needed, maybe they might be willing to give the student or the mentee a ride to a Costco or take them shopping and show them, what are the best values on groceries in the United States, because that might be different from where they're from. And finally, encourage them to review resources on the OIE website and visit our office with specific questions for immigration items. Finally, I want to talk about the rewards of working with an international student. Again, there's potential for you to make a lifelong friend here, which is really amazing. I hear stories all the time of students who come here and study and then go home to their home country and are maybe there for a couple years and continue to send holiday cards to the American host families or the mentors, as well as if you as a mentor intend to travel to that country at some point, you have someone that you can go visit. That's the bullet number 3. You have a friend to visit and give you expert advice on what to do and what to see, and I'm sure will be more than willing to kind of repay the kind of debt that they have to you all as someone who learned so much from you while they were here. The mentee will also be able to challenge and grow your own perspectives, which is important, again, having this learning-oriented mindset. They can also be an expert guide for trying new foods and determining what is closest to authentic cuisine. In Atlanta, I think there's a pretty big food culture here, and finding what's the best or most authentic restaurants is a pretty big hobby of mine, and I love being able to ask students what would they say is closest to their own home country's style of cooking. You also have someone to explore these places with, in addition to new cultures and events and traditions. You could also practice a new language with this person, or even take advantage of their own unique skills and talents. Now, again, this doesn't mean that you're going to have this person work for you, but for example, maybe if you're having trouble with your computer or you're having trouble with something very specific, there are lots and lots of very talented engineers here, both like computer engineering, mechanical engineering, as well as business, who might be able to think through some concepts with you and maybe educate you on some things that they're very talented in. So that's really a wonderful return on this relationship and this investment. So I think I'm going to be able to pull up the Q&A section. So I think if you go to YouTube, you can go ahead and type in some comments. I think we have 2 people listed as watching now. I'm sure there will be more who will be able to watch after this session is done. I know it's a Friday in November, which is always busy. But I'm going to hang out for a couple of moments, and if I do see some comments come up in the live chat on the right-hand side, then I'll go ahead and respond. So I'll just take about 30 seconds, a minute, and wait for any questions that might be typed in. Okay, all right. Well, it looks like most people are probably going to be able to watch this in review. So I'm going to go ahead and just put my email back up here so that if you all do have questions later, you can go ahead and contact me. I'm not going to be able to guarantee an immediate response, but 24 hours is my usual timeline. 24 to 48 hours when it's a little bit busier. So again, my name is Chase Harvey. I'm an International Student and Scholar Advisor here at Georgia Tech. I work in the Office for International Education, and I've got my email there. So please feel free to reach out to me. If you have specific questions about the Mentor Jackets program, of course, you'll want to reach out to the Mentor Jackets program coordinator over at the Alumni House, who will be able to give you more specific answers there. But thank you all so much for listening to this presentation. Hopefully it's useful for you, and I hope you all have a wonderful day ahead of you. Thank you so much.